Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. We are here with Dr. Desmond Wallington, PhD, licensed psychologist, provider of ketamine assisted psychotherapy, political activist, the individual who's got a very big proposition coming up in his state that we're going to get into today. Dr. Desmond Wallington, would you please be so kind as to maybe introduce yourself and fill in anything that I have left out?
Okay, yeah. I've been a licensed psychologist since like 2011, 2012. You lose track of things eventually. 2019, so counseling psychology, a lot of research on like post-traumatic stress disorder, resilience, that type of stuff. Blah, blah, blah. And in 2019, I just kind of like stumbled upon the 2019 campaign here in Denver to decriminalize psilocybin. That just kind of put me on a different trajectory, I guess, in my focus and practice area. It shifted, like it went from trauma and psychedelics and depression and psychedelics and mental health and psychedelics. I'm a voting member of the local, state, and national Green Party. So I'm super. Oh, are we there? I'm to the left, and then I. That's how I got introduced into the psychedelic space. Are you there, George?
I am. I was kind of freezing up on me a little bit right there. Maybe it's the connection or something, but it's okay. I can hear you. It just kind of froze up on the screen for a minute. Let me see.
Hello.
Yep, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. There you are.
Okay.
All right.
Perfect.
We had a little bit of delay. So I've been doing that. Been working with ketamine since 2020. Happening here in Denver, and we are this election day. We're all voting on that, and we'll see how those cards fall.
Yeah. So Prop 122 in Denver, it's a process of
Colorado.
Colorado. It's a process of decriminalization. But you have an interesting take on it. Would you be so kind as to maybe fill people in on what it's about and what you think about it?
Yeah. So there's like maybe three different components to it. There's a statewide decriminalization. So possess and gift psilocybin, mescaline, DMT, and ayahuasca. I don't think anything should be criminalized. I think if you're caught with heroin or methamphetamines, like jail's probably not the best thing for you. But it does decriminalize those plant medicines, I guess. And psilocybin's a fungi, not a plant, but you get where I'm going. Expungement, if you have any type of criminal history just regarding one of those four substances, there's a way of getting that expunged from your criminal record, which housing, food stamps, you know, if you're trying to get any type of social service or a job even, right? Like you don't need that shit on your record, right? That's bad news for you. So let's do that. All about that. And then it creates a regulated access model, which means that sometimes I hear people say like, I'm really interested in psilocybin. I see all the research that Johns Hopkins is doing. I did mushrooms in college, but I feel like I could use a therapist or some sort of facilitator guidance to do this work. And maybe I don't really feel safe doing it on my own. Like you know, like I want to make sure, like I have guns in the house. We're Colorado. We love our guns. And I don't want to do something to put myself at risk, you know, kind of thing, or what if I walk and hit my head on the counter going to the bathroom kind of thing. It would just be nice to have someone there. And so people do value the role of a sitter or a therapist or some sort of facilitator during those sessions. And maybe those people doing those services should be licensed with the state. So you're not left to your own devices, because there is a lot of issues within the psychedelic medicine space around like sexual predators taking advantage of people under the influence. And I had a patient point out to me the other day, like even like in the AA space, there's like guys that'll go to AA meetings and they're not alcoholics, but they just want to meet vulnerable women.
Wow.
And prey upon them. So there are people who are in it for the wrong reasons. And then what happens is like you find one of these people and they hurt you, and then you can't go to the police because the police are going to be like, well, what were you doing, doing drugs with a stranger? You went off the internet kind of thing. So there does need to be some layer of like consumer protection in this space. And that's what I think Proposition 122 does under regulated access, is provide consumer protection.
Yeah, I would recommend everybody check out your article, and I'll link it in the show notes. I liked the article for a lot of reasons. I thought there was some funny parts in there when you compared the Elon Musks to the Maria Sabinas. And for those who might not know, that was really funny, man. Well done. You're a good writer. Can you maybe explain to people what that little dichotomy is?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So one of the concerns too about Proposition 122 is that I remember when was it? 2012. Colorado and Washington State were the first states to legalize recreational cannabis, right? And what happened was, a bunch of rich white dudes just opened dispensaries, and they got all the money, right? And cannabis has been a multi-million, maybe $billion, I don't know. A lot of white guys made money. Sorry, I'm not calling you out. Not you, but and that's a concern, because there's the issue of equity and equality, and then a lot of people who have been maybe, or who come from marginalized backgrounds, because you look at police records, and like if you're an African American caught with cannabis, you're more likely to be sentenced to jail and get a stiffer sentence than a white person that is arrested with cannabis and sent to jail. So then if you have that certain record that a black person might statistically disproportionately have, that excluded you from participating in the recreational cannabis market because you had a criminal record. Sorry, you don't meet the criteria to participate in that in the space of cannabis in Colorado. Now that it's been legalized, yikes! Yeah, that's fucked up. Let's call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
So there's a concern that's going to, like, this idea that decriminalizing like psychedelics and creating a space for a regulated access to psilocybin, it is going to create another boondoggle for white men to come in and swoop in and to galvanize the space and to financially benefit from it. Well, that's an interesting idea, and that's okay. Interesting to think about. I do think there's like maybe two different ideas that might be necessary to kind of think through to make that conclusion. One is the idea that, like I said earlier, the Johns Hopkins research is already happening. By 2025, like guesstimate is that like all their research will be done. Psilocybin will be, the FDA will give its seal of approval to psilocybin assisted therapy, which will be the first time the FDA ever approves any type of psychotherapy. Like going to graduate school, I learned about like cognitive behavioral therapy, like behavioral therapy, psychoanalysis, humanistic therapy, existential therapy. The FDA has never given their seal of approval to any type of therapy. But this will be the first time that they give their seal of approval to a type of psychotherapy, because there is a medication attached to it. So the first one coming down the line will be MDMA. And then the second one after that will be psilocybin. And so that will create a framework where the pharmaceutical industry can come in. You know, we're developing synthetic psilocybin. I'm aware of like some companies developing like transdermal psilocybin that might have like it might not have the nausea effects and like the GI problems, because serotonin is really similar to psilocybin. So it has those serotonin receptors in your gut, gives you like cramps, and you know, maybe might make you have to like GI problems kind of stuff.
Right.
You know where I'm going with that.
I know exactly.
Okay. MDMA is already synthetic. MDMA is a derivative of mescaline. Mescaline's been around forever. Around the 20s, they developed MDA, and then from a derivative of mescaline, and then from MDA, they created MDMA. So even though it's not mescaline, it does kind of, it is in that family tree of psychedelics. But that does create like a really exclusive space where you think about like how many people out of 100 people have graduate degrees that are licensed therapists, and then how many of those people who are licensed therapists are trained to provide the specialized care of psychedelic therapy. So again, like only the richest of the rich will be able to have access to those therapists. So that's a common. And that'll be nationwide, like from like Maine to Arizona, California. So in Utah, Indiana, I'm a native Hoosier, reddest of the red states. I know that it's just going to be accessible, and it's only going to be accessible to people who can afford those medicines. It is foreseeable that a person in Utah will be able to get like legal access to psilocybin assisted therapy, but they won't be able to have access to cannabis like they do in Colorado. So that's something to think about. Like,
so I guess I'm a little. I'm thinking about so it sounds to me like the federal law that there's a federal law coming through that's going to make it accessible. Is it going to be like a licensing thing? Like that seems to be what it's going to be. It's going to cause the people that have the money to be the ones that buy the licenses and are able to distribute it. Is that versus the mom and pop shops that are going to get just wiped out because they don't have the money, they don't have the resources, they don't have the connections or the lobbyists to the senators to get in the corruption part of it. I guess on the topic of on psilocybin, if they make psilocybin legal, does that make all the analogs legal, like the 4-ACO-DMTs and all these little analogs of psilocybin? Would those become legal because psilocybin's legal, or are those in a totally different area?
Are you talking about in Colorado or in like Utah?
Let's start in Colorado with the law, and then we can maybe move to the federal.
Okay, so the Colorado law, it's very maybe rigid. Psilocybin, mescaline, DMT, and ibogaine.
Okay. So none
So
of the analogs then.
That might be a little unclear.
Like,
and that's a valid question.
Yeah.
But so I guess you think of, so the thing is too, like, maybe one of the differences to think about is like people might not want the analogs. Like maybe the thing that's really abrasive and uncomfortable for them is like, yeah, sure, I could go to like a medical facility and I could do psilocybin there, but it's a synthetic psilocybin. And that money is tied to big pharma, like I said in the article, in the 1950s, 1960s, Sandoz Pharmaceuticals held the patent to that. Now, I don't know who's making it, but whoever is making it, like my money is going to be going to some pharmaceutical exec. Gross. Like, how am I supposed to have how am I supposed to have like a spiritual kind of experience knowing that? Versus like, okay, like I found some guy who's advertised and he's got the credentialing, through the state, and I'm just eating like a mushroom that was grown like in the dude's basement or in a facility. I know I'm eating the mushroom. That's what I want. It is the actual like organic material of the plant. So I think that's where like the interesting thing is like giving people the option of like, yeah, you can go to a medical space and get like a synthetic psilocybin, or you can go to like some person who's taken courses and learned and passed the test, and they'll give you the real deal mushrooms, and that's your option. I don't know like which one's better, but I do think like the issue of supply and demand is an issue, because I'll tell you like that, my heart of hearts, I'm like, yeah, you probably do need the therapist, you probably do need the medical setting, but I understand, like one part of me understands like, yeah, that's like one person for 200 people.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And the other one, it might be one person for 25 people. Kind of thing. And when you look at like the potential for abuse and exploitation, that if you really come through that like idea of like harm reduction, maybe the person, you just want to reduce the amount of risk that you can cause for the general population. So I do think expanding the pool of providers out there and who've done the training and the education for the single mom who's trying to work through her trauma, that she's not like on a wait list for 3 years for a treatment kind of thing, because post-COVID, we all know like what the mental health issue is for everyday people.
Yeah, I wish everybody had a really cool friend, because it seems like such a better setting if you have like a really cool friend who's done psychedelics, or maybe a cool friend who's done a lot of them. Then that cool friend could really grab your hand and walk you through the things you need to learn. And it makes me sad to think how many people are out there that are interested in this, but don't have that connection or that cool friend that may have done this or may have access to it. Because I think that there has to be a line somewhere. Like clearly there's people that are on the, there's people that have the possibility to really flip out if they take psychedelics. But I think that could be answered in a questionnaire. Like, have you had these different types of mental disorders in the past? Like, there's ways we could go about clarifying, or at least tightening down the group of who might be susceptible to needing to see it in a clinical arena versus someone who is probably fine in a different sort of home setting or a different setting. And I wish there was some sort of questionnaire or something like that. Another thing that interests me.
That's a good point.
Yeah, like I think
that's like one of the things like I've been talking about. Like I have friends working in Oregon, and I know one of the conversations happening there is like, okay, so someone comes in and they want to do psilocybin. Like if it's someone that has like a lot of trauma history, like how do we funnel that person into to connect with a mental health provider? If it's some rich like tech bro who just wants to like expand his mind,
right?
And just he doesn't have trauma, he doesn't have anything, but he just wants to learn and have that experience. Yeah, like how do we connect him with like the really cool friend with the high school degree, right? Like the guy doesn't need to have like a doctoral degree,
right?
To have that experience. So like how do we like pair these people, right?
I think we could give them a book. I think we can make them ask them to read, like maybe read The Island or maybe read Brave New World and tell me your thoughts on it. And by reading those,
what
do you think about this book? And then you could probably put them in one category or the other. Like, I think it's a really good idea, or this is a horrible, But and maybe not those books, but I bet you there's a questionnaire. I bet we could write a book just that told a short story about something, and then get people's reflections on it. I bet you Cole Butler would be awesome at this. Yeah. But I think that there could be a set of short stories people read in conjunction with a questionnaire, and then you could really get an idea of who people are. You could really do a personality test that way and be like, okay, this person is a little bit obsessive compulsive. There's a good chance that they're going to get stuck in some sort of time loop and freak out a little bit. Maybe their first setting should be here in this place or something like that.
Exactly. That's what we need to do. Exactly.
Yeah, I think it sounds awesome. And in a way, it's super exciting for me to get to be on the cutting edge and talk to people about what's happening here and what we can do to make a difference. And it's so amazing to me to see that people of all ages, all experiences, and all education levels are at this junction where we can come together and make a decision going forward. Even though it seems to me Big Pharma's poised to come in and do what they always do, it doesn't mean that we can't have some tributaries that kind of shoot off the main river right there and really change things.
It's a great analogy.
Thank you very much.
Exactly. Because I know not everyone can have access to the big pharmaceutical model, and people who have mental health problems, who are desperate, will sometimes go and put themselves in really vulnerable situations, and there does need to be some sort of consumer protection in this arena, especially because you're again a non-ordinary state of consciousness. You're vulnerable, and you just don't want to like find some random person off the internet and just assume that you'll be safe with them.
I had a recent conversation with Dr. Rick Strassman, and I had asked him, do you think what's happening here with psychedelics could be shut down the same way it was in the 60s? And he said, without even blinking an eye, he goes, yeah. He's like, don't think that there's not going to be another Jonestown Kool-Aid event. Don't think that there's not going to be another Manson out there. Like, those people are out there. And just with the law of numbers and the law of vulnerability, like, it's a good chance it could happen. And if it does happen, you could see the authorities or the people in positions of authority come in and try to close things down or clamp down really hard. So
that's a funny point that you cite those people, because if you go back and you look at like there were kind of two major laws that happened in the late 60s and early 70s that addressed psychedelic possession. One was in 1968 under Lyndon B. Johnson, and the senator was Thomas Dodd. I think he was like operating in the Senate subcommittee against juvenile delinquency, which was originally created to address like comic books, once upon a time. And so they had this whole issue like in like Sandoz Pharmaceuticals had kind of let their patent lapse, and they had kind of shut down their research around like LSD and psilocybin. For LSD, it was called diliciid, and psilocybin, it was called endocybin. So they had passed a measure in 1965 that created like a federal law around like if you were caught with any type of controlled substance, that it created like a mandated like treatment regimen or intervention. Like you had to go to rehab kind of thing. However, during that time, shortly after that time, Sandoz had let those patents lapse. So people were making LSD and growing psilocybin like it was going out of fashion, kind of thing. Like you know, and Sandoz didn't have the patent on those drugs anymore. So anti-war movement, anti-Vietnam stuff was happening. So they really had to buckle down because they were no longer protected under that 1965 legislation. So they had to expand it in 1968 to be inclusive of those. And one of the like interesting, so it's going to sound like I'm making this up, but I promise you I am not. So they had to bring in a doctor, and this guy, the doctor that they brought in, was like a genetic specialist, and he said, so like his main claim to fame was like in the early 60s he impregnated the first male baboon. The baboon never carried the pregnancy to full term. He said he aborted it, and when asked for like the research documents about it, he said he destroyed them. So this was the guy they brought in. And then there was a young woman who had given birth to a small child, who gave birth to a baby, and the baby had like underdeveloped limbs. You know, like not like a partial arm, partial leg kind of thing. And she said, "Oh, I did LSD during my pregnancy, and that's why my baby had those birth defects," kind of thing. And so that it's really important to kind of maybe understand, because there were two things. In fact, LSD is created from ergot. Ergot poisoning has been an issue for a large portion of our of history. Ergot grows on like rye and wheat crops, and it does create like it can cause like spontaneous abortions. You know, there's a example of like in somewhere in Europe, like once upon a time, like a small village had like a lot of rye crops get like so much ergot that like it became airborne, like seasonal allergies would, and all the pregnant women in that village like spontaneously aborted their children. Another side effect of it is called like St. Anthony's fire, which causes you to like your limbs on the extremity turn black, and it creeps up. So you have to like amputate the limb, because if it gets to the chest, you die, kind of thing. However, ergot has been used for a significant history of time amongst like midwives, like because it does help to like stop like postpartum bleeding, because after the baby's born, that was a frequent cause of death, was women bleeding to death afterwards. So the ergot intervention helped to kind of freeze everything, because when it causes like the spontaneous abortion, it causes like the amniotic fluid around the fetus to like turn into cement, and the fetus like literally suffocates to death, kind of
Mm.
thing. So it's had a really kind of interesting history within pregnant women. And then there's an issue of like in the late 50s, there was a medication that was FDA approved and causing a lot of birth defects, like deformed limbs, called thalidomide, which they were giving to pregnant women to help address morning sickness. So this guy was trying to make the case that LSD was, it's made from ergot, and we know
Right.
ergot causes like St. Anthony's fire. And remember, the FDA, like a decade ago, allowed thalidomide to come out on the market, and it caused all these birth defects with children. And there was a lot of fear around that time because of those two things. And then so that research never panned out, never be true, and it was just based off this like one anecdotal evidence of this one person. And then this guy Cecil Jacobson just kind of disappeared off like the public radar for a couple decades, until the late 80s, early 90s. He was arrested because he was a fertility doctor. He's one of those doctors that was using his own semen to like impregnate women. John Goodman played him like in a Saturday Night Live skit. Melissa Gilbert, everyone's favorite 80s like made for TV movie kind of thing. Seeds of Deception, I think, was the name of that TV movie. So that guy created a drug law, and we found out like 20 years later that he's a sexual predator. And then in the 1970s, there was the controlled substance abuse law came out, and there was one of the main people testifying about that was a guy named Dr. Laverne. I think it was Alex Laverne. I'm blanking on it right now. But like L-A, capital A, capital L, A, capital V, E-R-N-E. He was saying that like cannabis and psychedelics were responsible for the My Lai massacre. That all these kind of hippies were strung out, and they just like killed all these poor people in Vietnam. And he later, again, he kind of fell out of the public eye for a little while, and then in the late 70s, he emerged in everyone's favorite tabloid magazine, The National Enquirer, peddling carbon dioxide therapy. He said he claimed he cured like depression, anxiety, autism, what they call like mental retardation at that time with carbon dioxide. Actually, people died under his care because you can't be breathing in carbon dioxide. So we have these two really interesting people with like really questionable medical like consequences to their career that have shaped our drug laws in American history, and no one ever. It took me a little while because I did this research in 2019. I was like, well, why did these things become illegal? And you have to like go back and find like the actual like screenshots of the congressional records of the testimony of these people, and then you like, well, let's Google the person's name, you kind of thing, and then you're like, oh my god, like, why are these people still relevant in drug law, in drug reform? So like it does maybe as me as an activist really caused me to like, yeah, maybe I don't like necessarily like believe like the experts that get called into these testimonies, because psilocybin, DMT, ayahuasca, ibogaine, they've been a part of American culture, or not American culture, but different cultures throughout the globe for hundreds of thousands of years. And to like deny the benefits and that they haven't been useful in different parts of the world, that is seeing drugs through a very white European lens that, yeah, maybe it wasn't relevant to Western medicine, but these have been in use for a long, long time, kind of thing. And why are those people's histories like even less relevant than our like the white European history?
Yeah, it dovetails nicely with. First off, I bet you neither one of those guys did psychedelics, and that's kind of what scares me
I
about
don't.
the
Yeah.
pharmaceutical or the people with all the money coming in and taking over. There's so many doctors, and it seems weird to me that we've gotten away from doctors using the substance on themselves. There was a time when doctors would have to be an expert in this particular substance to thoroughly understand what it does. And somewhere along the way, we decided that's not the thing to do. But if you look back at different cultures, it's the person that understands the substance that can actually recommend it to you. And in some cultures, you know, the person would take the ayahuasca, and then they would diagnose the person with the trauma. So, you know, in some ways, I think that when it comes to the idea of you know, whether it's Prop 122 or pharmaceutical versus the individual, I think there should be some prerequisite for the person to have full experience with the psychedelic or the medicine that they're going to give to the person. Only then can you thoroughly understand what the person's going to go through. Only then can you understand how they may react, or at least have an idea of how they may react. And then you can be such a better sitter. You can be such a better facilitator if you understand the experience in which someone's going through. When we look at trauma, and you're someone who's dealt a lot with behaviors and psychology, if you've been through a traumatic situation, it seems to me like the person that grew up being abused thoroughly understands the person who was abused in their office. And I just think that there should be more of that. Like, that should be something that this whole thing blows up and is like, we need to rethink medicine. We need to rethink counseling. We need to rethink these things that can help out the next generation. And it's great to go to school, and it's great to learn from a book, or it's great to learn from a teacher who learned from a guy who knew someone who had a friend that went through the thing. But it's much more advantageous if you yourself have been through it. Like, there's a certain kind of degree that should come with that. I think that is sometimes the purpose of tragedy, is for you to come out of it and then to come to the other side and help someone up. And first off, I want to say thanks to everybody in the community for your activism, because I think that you've done this. You've gone out, and that's why you were able to help change laws, and that's why you're so passionate about it. So thanks for that.
Well, all shucks. Let me blush for a second. And I will tell you, like, working with ketamine, like I have done, like, I've seen how the sausage is made. I've done like an induction series, and I found a great benefit from it. And I've done several booster maintenance treatments. When you're stressed, you get cranky. You shouldn't be cranky all the time when you're a therapist. So it's been really helpful for me. And I'll tell you, like, I've worked with other people coming into the ketamine space, and they always ask, like, well, have you done this? You know, kind of thing. And like, oh yeah, like I have, kind of thing. And I'll tell you, like, that gives me a little bit more street cred. You got your doggy? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
How did I know? And I was kind of chuckling as you were talking about that, like saying, like, thinking, like, I remember a conversation I had once with a person who was like, I wish like the doctor who put me on, like, wrongly prescribed me lithium had done lithium before, kind of thing. Maybe they would have thought twice before, just dispensing me lithium, like it's
Yep.
Pez, like from a Pez dispenser kind of thing. So that does give me a little bit of credibility that, like, when I work with people with ketamine, that I can talk about my ketamine experiences. And I know MAPS has been doing the best they can of trying to let people doing MDMA therapy to have an MDMA experience, because you do want to relate with the provider and the person prescribing the thing on whatever medicine they're working with, on that level. And that's like that. Maybe the thing big pharma has is that, like, doctors aren't taking lithium or Seroquel and and all these like heavy antipsychotics, and it's probably not appropriate for them.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. But it does cause a lot of issues for people, and people do want something. The evidence around, like, SSRIs and some tricyclates and other SNRIs and the traditional toolbox that, like, regular prescribers have isn't the best tool for them, and they've been through them all, and they want something that's a little bit more that's different, I guess, than the regular psych med intervention that you might get from your PCP. And the psychedelics, you do want the person to have a little bit of experience of what they're about to go through, and to be able to hold space and to understand. I understand, like, like, I wasn't in war in Iraq or Afghanistan or Yemen or wherever the U.S. has been at war for the past 22 years. But I might understand trauma, and I might understand anxiety, and I might understand depression. I might be able to help someone who's had those war experience, but just because I haven't had that same war experience doesn't mean that, like, that our relationship and our bond, that there can't be some sort of therapeutic rapport there that helps to facilitate healing. So it does help to have a little bit of trauma and experience, but you don't necessarily have to have the same trauma and experience of the person that you're working with.
That brings me to this other, and this is kind of an interesting question that's been on my mind, and as I'm curious to get your opinion on it. Do you think that certain types of psychedelics pair better with different types of traumas? Like, let's say, and I'm just throwing this out here, I have no idea, and I'm not a doctor by any means, but I'm curious to get your opinion. Like, do you think maybe ketamine, being a disassociative, might be a little bit better therapy for someone who has been abused sexually, versus psilocybin being better for a different type of trauma?
That is a great question.
Thank you.
And that is a common conversation and question that a lot of people have. And the honest question is, no one knows, because we haven't been able to do this research. Maybe ketamine might be really good for OCD, and maybe MDMA might be really helpful for sexual assault, or maybe it might be a thing like where we start you off with ketamine, and then we transition you to psilocybin, and then we transition you to something else, and it's a building process.
That's a great idea.
There's a lot of fun research questions here that no one
Yeah.
has had, and I would be an asshole if I claimed to know like
Right.
which one was best. And you always want to say it like it's okay that I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
think anyone knows. I try to keep abreast of the research, but I do think you know there's lots of interesting research around like like microdosing LSD and like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, and there's like all kinds of there's research around like psilocybin and smoking cessation. There's research around you know all these different substances with these different things, and we really haven't, because of all the research that kind of got shut down in the 50s and 60s. We are in a stage of arrested development around all these medications, and we're really trying to play catch up right now, because it's shameful we don't know more about these things than what we could have known had these trials and clinical trials been able to continue on, you know, in the 60s and 70s. But the you know, the pro-war kind of movement kind of derailed them, you know, at that time.
Do you think maybe the introduction to some of the big pharmaceutical companies would bring more money into the system for these kind of studies?
Yeah, that's kind of the funny thing, right? I always laugh about this because you know this idea of like a psychedelic capitalism kind of makes me chuckle, just because I like kind of just on like on the idea that like I have friends who go to the dispensary once a week, and they buy all the cannabis they need for the week, and they're happy, and that really works well for the capitalist model of like more and more and more and more, because they're always returning, kind of thing.
Right.
And then I have friends who have depression, and they will use psilocybin once or twice a year. How the fuck do you build a business on that? Like you know, you're consuming something once or twice a year versus like daily or weekly, like you might with cannabis, kind of thing. So I do totally think that the pharmaceutical industry is always like vultures, you know, circling like the dead carcass on the side of the road.
Totally.
But like, are they really going to like? Is this really going to be profitable to them? Like you know, the guy like the guy that created like Bic razors and lighters and pens. He said like the best business model is creating something that people use all the time and that they need to replace all the time. Psychedelics, not really like it's not like Zoloft or Prozac where you're taking it every day, kind of thing, forever, like they want you to.
Yeah.
It is a very dramatic short-term intervention. And I can maybe anticipate like in the beginning there being like a lot of people doing this all at once, but they're not going to come back. Like, it's not going to be a daily thing. It's not going to be a weekly thing. It's going to be a once or twice a year kind of thing. And I don't like, how does that look in your spreadsheet? Like, I'm not like a business major, so I'm not going like to pretend like to understand how that's going to work for them or the long-term benefits of that. Like, just as an outsider, like there's just like a big question mark in the back of my head around that. So
yeah,
seems a little bizarre.
I would you know, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And my good friend Benjamin George always says it's not so much that we're going in the circle, it's that we're going in this helical model. So we're always moving up, but even though we're going around. And I would forecast, and what's scary to me is that, especially in medicine, if you look at all these crazy commercials people have, they're like, look, you get a puppy and you're in the roses and this girl
and you
loves
get like
you. You don't even know
explosive
what it is.
diarrhea kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, so if we look at that model of like it's all marketing, I think what you'll see when it comes to psilocybin is, yes, you should do this. You can have great effects doing this twice a year. However, you may want to ask your doctor about a microdose sort of therapy that where you take it every 2 days and you take this patch every 2 days and this one every 3 days. It's like a Nicoderm patch. Like once the marketing gets involved, I think you're going to see an onslaught of sort of weekly dosing or bi-weekly dosing that, and then you're going to get into these different analogs. You get into this patch, and it's going to go from this ceremonial fashion twice a year around your friends and people that care about you to a wake up, slap on the patch, and have a great day sort of a thing. And it just seems that marketing, I think it was Steve Jobs who talked about, the reason companies die is because the engineers lose and marketing takes over. And the same thing can happen with drugs. If you look at the way the shot is rolled out, or you look at the way the stuff's rolled out, and that's kind of scary to me in some ways.
Okay, so that kind of let me backpedal a little bit about my my academic upbringing. My one of the I think like the first journal article I was published in was on American Indian Enculturation scale. And in indigenous cultures, there's in the U.S., right? There's like peyote and psilocybin and ayahuasca, Southern America, right? Peru. And there's this kind of experience that you go into in this kind of maybe religious cultural experience that's kind of more collectivistic in nature. So like you have an ego death experience, you come out of it, and your ego comes back online. It's like, nice try, George. You tried to kill me.
I'm still here.
I'm still here. Like like you got to go to work. You got family. You got bills to pay. Like you got shit to do, George. And you're like, fuck. Like okay, like I'm always going to be stuck with myself. Like I'm always going to be there. But you've just had this really spiritual, magical, ethereal experience, and you kind of have to like maybe renegotiate your relationship with yourself and how you talk to yourself about yourself to kind of navigate. Like it's hard to feel unworthy and like unlovable after that kind of transformative experience. But if you're thinking about this through the lens of a medical setting, so you go to a therapist's office, you do psilocybin, and then you go back home. All right, if you try to talk to this about your neighbor about it, or your spouse, or your brother, or whatever, you're gonna sound like fucking crazy. Like they're gonna be like, whatever. Like, what are you talking about, dude? And then you think about how these things have been kind of part of the culture in different like indigenous settings throughout history. These are often like a rites of passage situation where it's like a bar mitzvah or something, right? Yep. You hit a certain age, you go do the thing, you come out, you return to your community, and everyone in your community has had that experience. So these things aren't necessarily like helpful for like the traditional Western European HIPAA model of intervention that values privacy and secrecy and confidentiality kind of thing. That there is kind of like, you look at the more collectivistic kind of societies and how these things are kind of helpful in like, oh yeah, we're all in this together. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't open that Amazon facility where I'm paid 80 times more than you are,
Yeah.
kind of thing, right? Because you do want to kind of think about the whole and the collective and the community that you're a part of versus like the Western medical thing. So yeah, they might be able to take the trip out of a psychedelic experience and develop compounds where you don't have that kind of spiritual kind of experience, but and it can create like a medical access thing. But like, is that really what we're missing as a culture, or are we missing the idea that we're all in it together, and that a rising tide lifts all ships, like like the kumbaya bullshit, right? Like we gotta there is a value kind of difference between the two. So yeah, sure, go for it. Try to do manipulate these things and do whatever and expect that you're going to get the results, but I'm very doubtful.
Yeah, I have a friend in finance that I was speaking to him about mushrooms and psilocybin, and I was telling him like, hey, I think maybe you might be able to benefit from this. And he told me, quote, like, I can't do this because it really makes me realize what I'm doing is wrong. And I'm like, yeah, that's why you should do more of it, dude. That's why I'm telling you need it.
And that's why
maybe help
that's why people are going to gravitate towards the Maria Sabinas and not the Elon Musk kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I agree. I almost, in a way, hope to see psilocybin as this Trojan horse that gets into medicine. Like, yeah, you guys, pharmaceutical companies, you should definitely use this. And then all of a sudden, it just opens up, and the people that are in positions of authority, like, what the fuck am I doing? God damn it, this is wrong. And I think that on some level, if we pan back and we take a look at the cultures that came before us, whether it's the Native American cultures or some of the cultures in South America, or even some of like the tribal cultures that were in European back in the 1500s, like, I think one thing we're missing that psychedelic shines light on is the ritual use, the ritual of life in modern day has been just wiped clean from people's lives. There's no more rites of passage. There's no more Eleusinian mysteries. There's no more participation in the ritual. And that's the thing that binds us together as a community, is this time of sacred time. And we can all experience the same time. If I go through my own Eleusinian mysteries at the age of 15, and then my kid gets to go through it, in a way, they're experiencing the same time that I did. And it's this idea of us connecting and sharing this time that we had. Even though we've moved past it, we can still revisit that time by watching our kids go through it, or our grandparents getting ready to go through something that one day we'll go through. And I think that is one of the promises that psychedelics holds for me, especially the psilocybins and the ayahuascas and the different types of organic, so the organic things
natural medicines.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that. We got a question for you that came up in the chat that they wanted to address you here, Desmond.
Okay.
I'll put it up on here.
Ego death is a misstep of terms. Potentially, the focus should be on integration of experience and putting your saddle on the ego. Okay, instead of racket. Okay, yeah. So, like, ego death is kind of like a very like a term that's like subjective, right? So maybe. Let me explain this a little bit. When I use the term ego death, I think about it as like, our left hemisphere and our right hemisphere of our brains are always kind of communicating with each other, and we throw a monkey wrench in it for an hour, and certain areas of our brain that aren't necessarily talking to each other are talking to each other, and that's a very subjective experience. And there's a lot of people out there who don't like the term ego death. I like it. I get where you're going. But I will tell you, like, there have been moments during like my ketamine treatments where like I had no idea what my social security number was, or what my where I was born, what my address was, and I was just kind of plugged into this existence of reality of thinking like, yeah, dude, like the energy that's running through the tree is the same energy that's running through me, and we're all the same. Life is life, kind of thing. That's what I mean, by ego death. It's a very subjective term. Of course, scientifically isn't something you can like quantify.
Right.
It's a very qualitative kind of thing, and the looking through the lens of science, and that is the interesting thing, because this is a very spiritual kind of experience of like where you just kind of have to submit and surrender in the phenomenological experience that you go through, that there's some sort of therapeutic thing happening there. And this is the same thing that we run into when we're studying like the therapeutic relationship. It's like you can't really quantify, like, do you like your therapist, or do you feel connected to them, or kind of thing. And this is like what makes the social sciences so hard, that you kind of do have to have like a mixed methods approach of the quantitative and the qualitative, and trying to capture story and experience with some sort of objective, like PTSD assessment, or anxiety assessment, or depression assessment, along with it, so you can try to kind of capture the two realities happening all at once. I will say that I really enjoyed your metaphor of the Trojan horse, and that made me think of this like that old curse, like, may you always get what you ask for, and always ask for what you get, kind of thing. And
I like it.
and I think that's like what could happen with the pharmaceutical industry. They think that they can use these medicines and substances for their advantage, and a lot of money could come in flooding this research, and it is probably, if they do make money, it'll be maybe all up front, and then over time it's not going to be that impossible growth model that capitalism kind of relies on. So it'll be interesting to see, because this stuff is coming.
Yep.
There's a lot of money behind it. There's a lot of interest behind it, and I think people have really had their fill of the kind of the prohibitionist idea that really values sobriety. That maybe there might be something therapeutic in a non-ordinary state of consciousness, that and maybe temperance isn't the way to go, kind of thing. That when we turn off these parts of our brain and we have this kind of grand connection with thing, maybe that does keep me in check and keeps me from exploiting the working class people.
Yeah, I really love the idea of as above, so below. And I like to go way out on the woo-woo tree sometimes. And like I see the planet as a brain. And if you think about the way in which mycelium grows under the ground, and it connects together the different trees and bushes and moves nutrients from A to B, and it looks a lot like a neural network to me when you look at a root structure.
Mm-hmm.
And I see me talking to you, and even in this conversation, it may not seem like we're having a huge effect on the pharmaceutical industry, but perhaps we go ahead and we're able to touch on some people that work in the industry, or they hear this, or they hear this thing. It seems like we are the mycelium growing and introducing ourselves to new networks and changing this. And just our conversation and the amount of conversations had, and the Proposition 122 and these different voting things that are happening, it almost seems that the same way psilocybin affects the ego so too has it introduced us as its agents to affect the populace. And like we are changing. Like look at the world of ego that's slowly becoming ridiculous. Like this, we're gonna fight in the Ukraine about resources. We'll fight to the last Ukrainian. Like what are you guys doing? Like just knock it off. Like there's so much more we can do. And like people are beginning to wake up and see this, I think. And like it just makes me thankful to know that we're moving away from Adderall and into psilocybin, and you can feel it in a way.
there is the Adderall. They're running out of Adderall. That's
Thank goodness. Thank God.
I know, right? Legalize meth. As fun as an idea as that sounds, maybe that's not the best idea. And I will have like tell you stories of like people who started microdosing psilocybin, and like I'm able to focus more, and and I can actually go to sleep at a right time, and then I don't have that like horrific like hangover effect. Like it happens, and then I'm done. I went, yeah. Wouldn't that be nice? You know, if you could stop a drug and not have like some sort of like dramatic physiological reaction to it. Wouldn't that be fun? Not the big pharma, but I do think that people want that, and there's a lot of interest in that, and that's what I do like about the Proposition 122 and this kind of the decriminalization aspect, that you can grow and gift and possess your own, because maybe there is some sort of therapeutic value in being able to grow your own medicine. Like I tried it once. It did not work for me. Like the things didn't do, like it didn't turn white. I don't know. and I just lost interest really quickly. But for some people, they really enjoy that. And that's part of their like healing process. Like these mushrooms that I'm eating, I grew them myself, and I cared for them, I nurtured them, and now, circle of life, like Lion King thing kicks in for them, and that's very helpful for them, versus just like, oh yeah, I went and got my Effexor from, the corner Walgreens, and the person checking me out, just was like, yeah, here's your drug, here's your things, go, kind of thing. And it's not a very intimate interaction, I guess. You go to a doctor's office, the doctor, you're lucky to get like 10 minutes with the doctor. Remember that scene in Requiem for the Dream where the doctor comes in and he barely makes eye contact with her, and she's back on her way, with her stimulant medication. There is not like a really, people don't get that sense of community around like the pharmaceutical thing, which is what I think really makes the psychedelic experience different from going to cannabis. Is that if I'm going to find a facilitator for a psilocybin experience, like I'm going to be like, hey, is this guy like on the up and up? Is he nice? Is he comforting? Do I feel safe with him? Am I able to engage with him? Do I feel seen and heard? Do I feel connected to this guy? Versus the experience of going to like the neighborhood dispensary where you walk in. It's a 15-minute experience. You get some random person behind the glass counter who's like, what do you want? And you look at it and you're like, oh, take an eighth of that. And they give it to you. You're out the door, a handful of minutes later. And then you don't go home thinking like, now I wonder how Cindy's doing. She was a really good bartender. You don't really have to have that relationship with buying cannabis that you do, like looking for like a psychedelic practitioner that's going to hold space for you.
Yeah. And I like sometimes I romanticize it in ways. And in my mind, like I know people that grow mushrooms and they're like, okay, this particular strain of white penis envy,
Mhm.
every morning at 6 a.m. I play all of my love Led Zeppelin,
Yeah, yeah.
because I want this to go to a person who's going to get all of my
Mhm.
love, and
Yeah, yeah.
there's something to be said. I know that's all subjective and whatever, but that's a cool facilitator that cares enough about this thing to inject a little bit extra. That's maybe they're getting a little more oxygen or something like that. And I think that that's the kind of love we need in order to help heal. And like that just plays into the ceremonial part of it. And there's so much that can go with therapy that is beyond the substance we're taking, but do affect the actual therapy you get. Because I think there's an emotional connection between facilitator and patient and
Yeah.
brother and sister and brother and brother. And I think a lot of that goes. I wanted to tap in. Are you doing okay on time? Sometimes I can go long.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. So I want to kind of tap into your ideas of a Native American. And there's a question about society that's kind of been dogging me a little bit. I'd love to get your perspective on it. And that question is, when we look at demographics, there's so many of our older generation. In Hawaii, we call them our kapuna. There's this older generation that's passing on. And if we look at our planet like an ecosystem, this huge generation that's, the boomers are like 2 to 1x and maybe 2 to 1 the next generation. And it seems to me like we're at this just buildup of like everyone's so on edge. And I'm wondering if that may have to do with the collective anxiety of this older generation facing death. And we know that psychedelics can really help people with this idea of passing on to the next place. And Lord knows there's a lot of us, and Lord knows there's a lot of boomers that could benefit from helping this anxiety. But do you think maybe this giant anxiety we're feeling may be connected to the boomers who are facing death in the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about, right? So and I think there's might be a lot of different things intersecting in this conversation. So I know, like, from like an American Indian / indigenous culture, that within a tribe or within a culture, that the elders and the youngest are viewed as the most sacred because they're the closest to the next world, right? Like the babies have just come from the spirit realm, and then the elders are like the closest to going there next, kind of thing, right? They're the ones going to die next, right? So they're going to go back there. Yeah, and I do think that's a really powerful, interesting thing to think about, because I know it's commonplace, right, for mealtime for those two. Like you feed the old and the young first, and then everyone else eats after them because they're the most sacred. Which for me, I think about it, and that really resonates with me. Like, yeah, I get that. Yeah, let's do that. So cool there. But then you think about maybe like how maybe that value system isn't always present in the lives of Americans. You get to a certain age, and then you go to a nursing home, and let's keep our fingers crossed. Like, the nursing home I go to isn't featured on like a segment of 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, right? And there's not really, it's not really valued. And your value is placed on capital and work and production and income, kind of thing. And you just hope that, like, that you'll be important, right? When you get older. And I don't, that's a kind of a new phenomenon, when we look at, the time span of history, kind of thing. And it's really interesting too, because we look at the boomers, and then the World War II greatest generation that came before them, and that was so much of their identity was like I was a veteran of this battle, and I did this, and and maybe the way our society was structured, right? Like I know, like my grandparents and my parents and that generation, they could have 3 kids and not have a college degree, and they could get good jobs and have a really good economic kind of history or future to look forward to. And now we see a lot of anxiety around that situation, because now a college degree is kind of equivalent to a high school degree once upon a
Yeah.
time kind of
Yep.
thing. And I know I get like, when I start talking about like student loan forgiveness and everything, like people a couple 3 decades older than me, they're like, well, I could pay for it. And I was like, well, how much were you paying for a
Mhm.
credit hour? Like $5, right? Like college was so much cheaper and accessible then. So we are seeing a lot of kind of economic tension and stress and anxiety around that. And when you maybe grow up in an idea of like you work and you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and that you're kind of you're this Horatio Alger myth of
Yeah.
if you just work hard enough, that everything's going to work out for you. People are having a lot more anxiety and skepticism around that idea. And there is going to have to be some sort of like collective awakening or shift out of this idea of like individualism, like you're on your own kind of thing. Because you're right, like the baby boomers are getting old. I don't, and there's significantly amount less Gen X, Gen Z, millennials. And it's not going to be like it was 40 years ago, when there were a small amount of like the greatest generation amount of
Yeah.
people, and so many baby boomers that were able to take care of such a smaller population before them. Now we're in a very top heavy societal structure, and I'd be scared too if I was a part of that generation. And they are going to be like, sorry, like you're going to be dependent on our charity as a younger generation, like when it comes to your
Yeah.
well-being kind of thing. Like I'm not saying like it's going to go to the idea, like the extent of Soylent Green, but but you better hope that we collectively like that we value you, and that you 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 maybe present yourself in a way that we do value you. Because sometimes the baby boomer population is very arrogant and very entitled,
Yes.
and they think that the younger generations are going to hand them the world on a silver platter, like it was for the World War II generation. And you need to turn up the cuteness a little bit if you want that to pan out for you. Sorry.
Yeah. I agree. And I worry because my parents are boomers, and, I think there's still a lot of boomers in positions of authority that are still holding on to whatever it is they're holding on to. And I fear, the attitude of the oldest generation is this idea of just pull yourself up, just work harder. What's wrong with you? You could do,
I know.
and it's like,
Wouldn't that be fun if that worked? Right?
yeah, look, it's not working. And this whole idea, what else isn't working? This idea that we farm off our grandparents to a home, the parents go to work and the kids go somewhere else. Like, we've destroyed the family. And when you do that, guess what? When it's your time to be taken care of, that whole process has been destroyed. I think you can see I really hope people in positions of authority and power begin to change their ways, because I see a wave of elder abuse that could be breaking upon everyone. When all the wealth is locked up here, when all these old schools ideas of, well, I did it, when there's no sort of looking down at people and saying, God dang it, I should be helping these people instead of just flaunting how much I have. Like, there's a real Soylent Green aspect to it. And that part of the future, I think, is something that you can see it, but I think it can be avoided if we start to look at ourselves as more of a collective than independence, because that road goes down a road that is flanked on both sides by barbed wire and prickly berries and, like mud bogs and stuff. So
it's a fun idea when you have the idea like, ooh, I'm gonna be young forever, kind of thing. Kind of, that's some other people. That's not me.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
And isn't it weird how there's so much money just being pushed into the world of keeping people young forever? Like, people are grasping at straws now. Like, we can live, we can transhumanize this. We'll be forever. It's like, no, you can't. There's no fountain of youth. We figured that out in the 1500s. You might live to 80. You might get 100, but you're still going.
So there does need to be some sort of collective mass shift in consciousness and awareness and compassion. And I do think there is hope within the psychedelic space that can be facilitated and nurtured and growing, just because like my parents and aunts and uncles, the boomers or whatnot, like they remember mushrooms, they remember LSD, and they're not like, now that they like know better, they're more open to it, and they're like God damn it, Nancy Reagan took all our drugs away from us. Well, we need to get that shit back. Okay, so what can we do to do that? So let's, I do think that we can have a trauma reaction looking at like big tobacco and cannabis and just anticipate the worst in the people, or we can maybe increase the access to psychedelics and maybe just take a leap of faith that like maybe this could be helpful, and it can open like the floodgates of compassion and understanding and connection, and that the asshole that's running like a Marlboro or Philip Morris or the Green Dragon or whoever the cannabis people here won't be the same people like in the psychedelic space, and maybe they'll have our best interests in mind, and that maybe they'll want healing because maybe the people doing this work have had trauma and they've gone through their own healing, and those are the people being called into this work. So you're going to have trust, like, because if you don't have trust in like the collectiveness of everything, right? Like, are you really advocating for psychedelics?
Yeah, I like that. I think maybe we need the opposite of the Just Say No campaign, and maybe it could be the Just Say Yes campaign.
Yeah. Exactly. And so I got to do my due diligence. Psychedelics isn't, if you have like, if you're at risk for schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, if you're like actively manic, these are not the things for you. It can make things worse. So that's the other reason why we need regulation.
Yeah,
is to do that education about like let's figure out a different path for you, but I don't want to make you worse.
Right. Desmond, you recently presented a paper at the Manas presentation.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that a little bit? What was that paper about?
Yeah, so that was about ayahuasca and mental health. Manas is was a conference by the Colorado Ayurvedic Medical Association, which I had never heard of Ayurvedic medicine until like a year ago. They reached out to us, which is like an indigenous Eastern Indian form of medical intervention. And basically, like my overview was just kind of giving a history of the psychedelic criminalization, like I talked about with like Cecil Jacobson and Albert Laverne, and then kind of maybe what the ayahuasca experience is, and how it's more of a community-based collective experience versus kind of like the Johns Hopkins MD psilocybin, the MAPS MDMA kind of more individualized, like HIPAA medical setting kind of thing, and how people might gravitate towards one treatment approach towards the other treatment approach, or they might want to kind of go back and forth between the two. And I think that it's okay that I don't know which one's going to be the best or the most effective. It's okay. But people do deserve autonomy, and people have sometimes an intuition about which one's going to be, which one they're drawn to, and which experience they want, and how do we get people, to what's calling them, and how do we make sure that the people that we're sending them to are adequately trained, that and how to prepare and what to expect, and then that are there for like the post-integration work of like, so you had this really cool, you got to hang out with God for an hour, and now like it's Tuesday and you're going back to work, and you want to flip off the guy next to you in traffic kind of thing, like what's going to change kind of thing. So there's got to be kind of you just can't expect like to have like a 3 to 8 hour psychedelic experience, and then that everything's just going to magically go away. You have to prepare for it. You have to have the experience, and then you have to kind of learn from the experience, talk to someone about it, and work on developing behavioral lifestyle changes, because after these treatments you do have increased like neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, and your brain is a little bit more plastic or malleable for a handful of days. So any type of behavioral or lifestyle change that you want to make is more likely to become habit or routine. Like that. An example I give is like, oh yeah, like I went to the gym the next day and I really didn't have that like, oh fuck, I don't want to go to the gym and work out kind of thing. Oh, I went and I actually enjoyed it. It was nice. So like, it's helpful to be able to talk to someone and to kind of anticipate these things, and like to have someone like a coach or whoever to set you up for success, after these experiences, so you aren't dependent on them. Like, ideally, like, they say like in the psychedelic community sometimes like you are the medicine, right? Like, you're your own medicine. Psilocybin and ayahuasca, they're medicines too, but you're your own healer. We all have our own natural propensity towards healing and growth, right? If I get a cut on my finger, that I don't have to do anything for it to heal. Like I don't have to look at it, will it to happen. My body has a natural propensity for healing. That doesn't mean I won't ever get a wound that requires medical attention. I might have to go to a doctor, and he might prescribe me an antibiotic to remove the infection. He might stitch the skin together. He might put a covering over it. The doctor doesn't cause the healing. He just creates the conditions for the healing to happen. And if you can extrapolate from that, how this intervention works is it's not the ayahuasca that causes the healing, or the psilocybin, or the ketamine, or mescaline, or whatever the substance is, or it's not me as the therapist, holding space for you. You're doing the healing. I'm just creating a safe container for the healing to happen within. That your thoughts and feelings and trauma can come up, like emotional debris and shrapnel, and I can pull it out here and there as much as I can, and I can ask some really fun questions from time to time. But you're driving the car, kind of thing. So it's part of this intervention, these interventions in medicines, is kind of maybe keeping my ego in check as a person, that I'm not the one like you have to come to me or else, like I'm the only one that can do this bullshit kind of thing. No, it's the people I work with that are doing their own healing and their own work, and I'm just kind of like like I said, like the sassy person in the passenger seat kind of thing. Like, maybe turn left here, turn right there, kind of thing. But they're ultimately the one driving, the direction of it. So that's I do think I'm always a little skeptical and hesitant of people who feel like they're the authorities and they're the experts in this. Yikes. Is it about you, or is it about the thing? So I do think that these conversations in these different medical communities can really help to kind of maybe keep our own egos in check, and to kind of think outside of like the traditional Western point of thing, where you go in and you spent 15 minutes with the psychiatrist, and now you're on lithium, kind of thing. And like, oh, well, the doctor said I should take it, kind of thing.
Yeah, in some ways, the doctors do that are harming their patients more than helping them. Like I really like the way you put that. That was beautiful. Like maybe that should be the idea of medicine, is to make sure this person never comes back to me, instead of making sure this person always comes back to me. Like, in a way, the therapist is almost transmuting themselves as the medicine. I guess maybe that's where the ego comes in. Like, look what I did for this person. Like, you didn't do anything for him. You made him come back to you every single thing. You made him dependent on you instead of making him independent.
Yeah, and I will say too, like I'm always like, sometimes I do cringe. Like, I'll be like in a meeting with the psychedelic community, and there's like some like 28-year-old, 25-year-old guy walks in. He's like, "Hey y'all, like, you're lucky I'm here. Last month I did some mushrooms, and they told me that I'm a shaman now. Like, I'm here. You're welcome." Like, and they expect like just to like the red carpet to be rolled out for him. And that's the tricky thing about this work, is that like I don't know, like, do I know anything more than someone else? I don't know. Yeah, I went to school for a while. Cool. But maybe I should like be in the business of teaching myself out of a job, or giving people the tools and the experiences, and it's that idea that how we get there, and how and what that process looks like. There's that old story about the like the Buddhist monk who was like living in a cage out, or not in a cage, in a cave somewhere, and he just spent his entire like day in, day out in isolation. Every morning, like a nun would come, leave a bowl of rice outside the cave. He'd eat the bowl of rice, go back and meditate. And then like he did this for 10 years, day in, day out. And then like he heard like, oh, the Buddha is giving a sermon out on this island. So the guy gets all excited. He wants to go see the Buddha and hear the sermon. And he starts to walk on the water to the island where the Buddha is giving the sermon. He gets halfway there and he sinks. And he swims back to the shore, returns to his cave, does the whole like thing for another 10 years kind of thing. 10 years later, he hears, oh yeah, the Buddha's back on the island, giving the sermon again. And this time the guy gets excited, he does it again, and he actually gets there. And he sees the Buddha, and he's so excited. And he tells him, like, yeah, like I've been at this for 20 years. After the first 10 years, I couldn't get there. And then I tried it again this time, and I was so pure and clean that I was able to actually make it across the thing. And then the Buddha turns to him. He's like, well, you know the ferry only costs 5 cents, right? You can get there. And you don't have to like beat yourself or like to punish yourself. Like you don't have to see me for like 20 years. Maybe a psychedelic can help you get to where you're going, a little quicker than traditional talk therapy can. Isn't that an interesting idea? Right?
Yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so much of us find ourselves holding ourselves back for whatever reason, for self-loathing, or it's an excuse of some way, or it's we don't feel like we're good enough to do it. There's all this things that we have inside of us that stop us from getting to a spot where we could be at tomorrow if we just let ourselves do it. And that's a big part of therapy, and it's interesting to think about. I'm always curious as to the way we could be if we just got out of our own way. And in some ways, I think that's what psychedelics can do for you. Like there's, at least in some of my experiences, whether I keep a journal and I write down my intentions before an experience, or sometimes I'll just go into an experience. For me, the best ways I have found is to write down in a journal prior to my experience what it is that's been bothering me, what it is that I've been thinking about, what it is that I want to accomplish. And then if I write that down in my experience, I may not get the answer to all of them. I may get a roundabout answer to something, but I feel like it helps me at least get on the right path to what I want to be about. And coming out of it, I always do like a decoding or a debriefing on myself, and it maybe take a day or maybe take a few days, but I always find some really good nuggets of truth. Even if it's not exactly what I talked about, it seems to be things that I can work on. And sometimes it's things I didn't even write down, and I'm like, oh, son of a gun. Maybe I have been a little bit too much detail oriented in my life lately. Maybe I should be pulling back and looking at the big picture. But yeah, it's an awesome therapy to think about. And
so yeah, you're right. And I don't say what I said before to kind of maybe minimize or to kind of undermine the importance of therapy, because I do find that people who have done a lot of talk therapy and that go into the psychedelic space, they often get more impactful outcomes than the people who've never done any type of talk therapy. And when I talk to them, I'm like, there is some sort of intellectual scaffolding that can happen, right? Like intellectually I can understand, like, yeah, like I didn't deserve to be abused, like totally. Like I deserve love, but that doesn't mean like no one's ever going to love me, and like I'm always going to like end up in the worst relationship, and my feelings might not necessarily drive with that intellectual understanding. And an example I give is in graduate school, I did that dissertation on forgiveness, and I spent years researching, reading, writing papers about forgiveness. And then at some point I stumbled upon like psilocybin mushrooms, like my second or third year of my doctoral program, and I was in the ideal psychedelic psilocybin induced space, and I had the right Bjork song came on. It was very ethereal, very healing, very like angelic, and then all these thoughts and feelings about forgiveness came up, and I could finally understand everything on an emotional level. Like I had that scaffolding there in place, and now I could understand it because I was thinking about like the indigenous culture that it came from, and my grandma's trauma, and how her trauma impacted how she parented my mom, and how that impacted how my mom parented me, and just this understanding and acceptance of like not taking it personal, and just kind of understanding that there's a context from that everything that all the struggles they put me through, that they had their own struggles, and I can't take that personal. And I don't know if I would have ever had that without the psilocybin experience. I sure I understood things on a very intellectual, dry academic level. My dissertation was I graduated. It was good enough. I guess the people reading it said I knew what I was doing, but I didn't have that kind of spiritual, phenomenological, subjective experience of it, and that is the magic of these interventions. Is that you do the work, and you do the research, and you prepare, and you bring in all the tools and all the knowledge that you've kind of accrued, over the years, into this moment, and it is kind of like a roulette wheel to some degree. You're spinning the wheel, and the ball is going to fall, where it falls. But we can how many chips do we have to put on the board, for you? Because wherever that ball is going to fall, it's going to help you out, buddy. So the more chips we have to put on the board, the lucky you are going to be going into this experience. Because sometimes people just have that experience, and they're like, "Well, I didn't feel anything," kind of thing. And it's like that's disappointing. Yeah.
Well, it sounds to me like there's this integration of doing the work academically and then bringing it together with the spiritual side. And when I look at the world today, so much of medicine has become specialization. Like everyone wants to be a specialist because that's where the money is. And everyone has these in all kinds of life. It's just this specialization. And we've gotten so specialized that this hand's not even talking to this hand because it's almost different languages. We need that spiritual nature to combine them. And when you told the story about how you've done all this work, you've read the books, you've read the essays, you've talked to the teachers, you've got the academic down, and then all of a sudden you have this spiritual realization that connects them. I think that where we're moving to, and I'm hopeful this is accurate, is the recombination or the rebirth of spiritual nature and academic nature coming back together. So it's like we're reconnecting, and we can have this idea of a maybe religious ceremony, but I like spiritual better. Like the rebirth of spiritual and science coming back together allows us to become whole again. I feel like we've been so segregated and so split apart. And I love the way you explained it, how all of a sudden you got this spiritual side of it. And I think that's what makes you probably a good healer and an awesome person. At least in this conversation, I'm really getting to understand how cool of a person you are, because you do understand. You have had these experiences. Hey, this happened to my grandma, this happened to my mom, and now it happened to me. And now I can kind of let go. So sometimes you have to let go so that you can understand. And like, think about the words, like you let go so you can understand and look. It's almost like you have to let go and drop down. Then you're understanding the situation that you can see. And like, that's what healing's about. And I think that is one place medicine is failing, is they're failing to let go. And what do psychedelics do? They help you let go.
Yeah, exactly. So there's an ideology that I kind of draw upon when I do this work with people is what's sometimes called parts work, right? Yeah, and it's the idea that we have these different parts of ourselves that we're always kind of managing, right? There's a part of me that wants to eat cookies all day and thinks that's a really good idea, right? Yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. But there's another part of me too that wants to fit my pants and live at the gym, and neither of those things are obtainable, realistic things that I can do. But I can I can have 2 cookies a day and maybe run half a mile or something, right, and be healthy. But I can learn to kind of moderate between these two different parts of myself, right? Um, and we do kind of have to think about things like on that level, like an integrative approach doesn't necessarily mean that we combine the two together. Like the two parts don't necessarily have to 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 be one part at some point. Just like I have a heart and I have a liver, I don't want to integrate those two parts because my heart does one thing and my liver does something else, kind of thing, and I need both of them. And I'm a collection of parts, right? And yeah, okay, so I'm a male LGBT indigenous psychologist, and this decade, and I have this socioeconomic background, and um, I have a lot of different parts. And there's a spiritual part, and then there's a part of me that wants to go watch comic book movies and everything, right? And I have to value all those things because they're all a part of my identity, and I can't, I have to manage them the best I can. And that's the neat thing about this intervention is that it does kind of let you those parts come up to you in a very upfront, sometimes abrasive, aggressive, why did I say that to them, and why did I, that was so, I was so awful, I was so gross in that, and you have to look at those things, and you kind of have to work with them, grow with them, and renegotiate your relationship with them, because it's like any type of family dynamic or group dynamic. Once your relationship with one part changes, it's going to change how your relationship with your other parts, like your relationship with your other parts. Just like if you're in a family system and son and dad team up against mom, and mom's always never gets what she wants, kind of thing, and they go to pizza, they like, we're going to Pizza Hut, and mom never gets to go to Kentucky Fried Chicken or whatever, right? And then one day, like, son aligns with mom, like, no, we're going to Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? That changes your relationship with dad and his ability to go to Pizza Hut, kind of thing. So it's that same idea, like with the parts you have within yourself. Like, once I change my relationship with my angry, bitter part of myself, that's going to naturally impact my relationship with my forgiving, compassionate, understanding part of myself, and I'm going to have to work on that, because I can't identify with the angry part all the time. And so there is this kind of maybe shift that we need in the medical community of like wellness and wholeness kind of thing, and like where your cardiologist has to talk with your dermatologist or the other people who are helping manage whatever is going on with you. And you're right, this idea that these two specialties can kind of operate independently from each other, and that you're going to come out better at the end of it. Yeah, maybe that's something we need to think differently about.
Yeah, I really think we're on the cusp of fundamentally changing the world in which we live, and there's so much there's a lot of bleak news out there, but when I have conversations like this, and over the last few years with my work with psychedelics, like I really see a bright future emerging, and I do liken it to a birth. Birth. There's a lot of tragedies that happen in the birth canal. There's a lot of times when something new emerges into a new form, and these things that we see dying around us, whether it's a lot of the boomer generation or whether it's these ideas of chaos and war, like it really seems like a new birth is happening. And I believe it is. And I believe that in the next 10 or 20 years, we're going to look back at this time as magical. Like, oh my gosh, now I understand what was happening. Now I see. And just talking to you, I can see the revolution happening in medicine and the Trojan horse. Like you and I can see this image happening. And other people are like, yeah, this is business as usual. But I'm really
I know.
looking
Yeah,
forward.
the earth is imploding on itself as we're having this conversation, right? And if the shit doesn't happen sooner rather than later, like what's going to happen, right? So there is a sense of urgency behind this, and hopefully, we rise to the occasion and we meet the demand of the moment. I guess, right? And and I'm glad we stumbled upon each other, and we got and you invited me to do this conversation today.
This is fantastic. I'm having a blast, and my goal is to have some more panels coming up where we do parts work with different people, but as a whole. So I'll invite you back, and we can have some other discussions. And but before we go, because we're landing this plane here, Desmond, what do you have? Where can people find you? What do you have coming up, and what are you excited about?
I don't know. Like, so right now I'm just like Tuesday. Like, please just get here and over this election cycle. I really don't do like it's really embarrassing. Like, I don't have a website. I don't advertise. Like I started working for myself like 3 or 4 months ago. I'm already like, I'm not like, I'm busy enough.
Right.
So word of mouth has been really helpful for me. So you can email me, I guess. So my name's Desmond Wallington. Growing up, everyone called me Desi, D-E-S-I. My email is Desi, D-E-S-I, Delics, D-E-L-I-C-S, @gmail. So if something I said was really interesting or profound to you, but that's how you can reach out to me, and that's how you can find me. I don't have a website, as embarrassing as that is, because I get that asked like once or twice a week, and I'm like, well, I don't have time for a website, and like I really don't like business is healthy enough, and that I haven't had to create a website. That doesn't mean it's not coming or it won't ever come. I just don't have anything. You found me on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Look for Desmond Wallington on LinkedIn. You can connect with me there. So did I answer the question?
Absolutely. It was perfect.
Okay.
And the interview was awesome. I really thank you for your time. And we'll talk again soon. I'll put all those links in the show notes for everybody to say. And I want to say thank you to everybody that took a few moments to participate in the chat.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. And reach out to Desmond and ask him some questions, and reach out to me and ask me some questions. And we really look forward to making the world we live in a little bit better. So that's what we got for today.
Thank you, Mr. The Full Monty.
The Full Monty. You've seen it here first.
Yeah. Have a good one, buddy, and thank you.
Absolutely. I'll end this here, and then I'll just talk to you for a moment. So I'll ask you to hang on for 1 second.
All right.